Regardless of which version you play, Panic Restaurant is always the same charming pick-up-and-play action platformer with simple, straightforward gameplay and the same charming little story about a chef who's trying to save his restaurant from the curse placed by a rival chef, which brought all the food in the restaurant as well as some kitchen supplies to life. And boy, what a restaurant this is. There are huge, giant freezers where they keep the meat and all sorts of interesting and cool-looking, often huge cooking contraptions. Heck, the entire game feels like something straight out of a whimsical, beautiful children's cartoon. Though in my opinion, the developers could have gone all out and did a little bit more with the levels to make them feel even more whimsical and magical. The final level of the game, leading up to what is essentially a very good final boss battle, is rather boring and unimaginative, something that for me was a huge disappointment as a kid when you play through this entire beautiful magical game and then you end up in a sewer level, which I never liked growing up and I still find them boring to this day, so that is rather disappointing. I feel that the developers had to rush the game, otherwise it probably would have had a few more levels and they would have been a tad more creative. The game definitely leaves a little to be desired in that regard. The main character of the Japanese version is different from that of the European and American versions of the game. In the European and American versions, we play as an older chef named Cookie, while in the Japanese version, the main character is a younger boy named Kokun. Other than their age and appearance, the main difference between Cookie and Kokun is their main attack, which only visually differs between the two and is functionally the same. Cookie uses a frying pan to defeat his enemies, while Kokun, being young and hot-headed, thinks that bashing his enemies with his head is the best course of action. Now, how that boy doesn't get dizzy, I don't know, but hey, what can you do? What little Kokun doesn't realize is that he looks rather awkward and dumb doing his head bash thing, whereas Cookie's frying pan attack is far more fitting and, in my opinion, far superior looking than the Japanese version's head bash. However, both characters are equally as charming and fitting for the game's story and setting, so it would have been best if the developers just let us choose between both characters in both versions of the game, and maybe even give them minor differences in how they control and how they play. Mastering the different weapons Cookie and Kokun use throughout their adventure is very important when it comes to successfully clearing the levels. You see, every one of their weapons has positive and negative aspects to it. For example, the default short-ranged attack they both use, the frying pan and head bash, have a bit of a cone to them, so they can hit enemies that come from above and in front of the characters. However, they are very short-ranged. Cookie and Kokun also pick up a spoon. Now, this spoon gives their attack a longer range, however, it only attacks enemies in front of the characters in a straight line. Then they also get a ranged weapon in the form of throwing plates. This one has a bit of a curve to it, so you need to judge your enemy's distance and positioning properly in order to hit them, otherwise you'll probably miss an enemy and get hit yourself. And finally, there is the fork that functions as sort of a pogo stick, which is more of a nuisance than a useful weapon in my opinion. Knowing full well that this fork is more of a problem than a weapon, the developers of the European version, in one instance, placed it in a way so that the player is better off avoiding it than picking it up. However, they can still accidentally pick it up if they want to pick up an extra life. So it's an interesting way to add an extra layer of challenge to the game, but it also feels a little cheap when you think about it. And this weapon placement leads us to the other difference between the Japanese and European, and I assume the American versions of the game. The Japanese version of the game is far more generous when it comes to letting the player use all these different weapons more frequently, which in my opinion is much better because you get to experience more weapons and therefore making the game a heck of a lot more fun. The European version is rather stingy when it comes to letting the player have fun with all these different weapons, and since getting hit makes you lose a weapon permanently and dying doesn't make the weapons respawn, you don't really get to have as much fun with the different weapons as you'd like, and you don't get to practice with them as much as you should. So that's a bit of a downside to the game in general. In trying to make the game more challenging, they stripped it out of its fun factor, which in my opinion is a problem. And both the Japanese and Western versions of the game are guilty of this, unfortunately. One other thing I dislike about the Western version of the game is the title screen. The Japanese version has a far more beautiful, colorful, and inviting title screen, whereas the European and American version share a very underwhelming, very boring, and generic title screen, which I don't understand why was changed when the Japanese version has a very fitting screen for the type of game this is. And the last difference, which in my opinion is rather big, is the invincibility power, which in the Western versions of the game is far more charming and superior than what the Japanese version has. I did say that Panic Restaurant is an action platformer. However, you won't be doing much platforming in this one. It's mostly a straight-up action game where the biggest challenge comes in enemy placement, whereas the platforming is there in some sections. However, there isn't much to it. Of course, as is the case with most old games, you have to memorize the enemy's positions, their way of attacking, you have to get good with your weapons if you want to successfully clear the levels with as little health lost as possible, because once you lose all your lives, despite having infinite continues, you're gonna lose all your health upgrades, and you'll be down to only 2 lives, which, for new players, is going to make practicing later levels of the game very difficult. And in my opinion, it's in a way fate worse than death itself, so you are better off starting over and retaining your upgrades if possible. Now, the game has these bonus stages which at first don't appear to do much except give you extra points, but extra points are exceptionally important because they eventually earn you an extra life, and you want to score as many points in order to have as many lives as you can. One of my favorite things about this game is the fact that the levels stretch both horizontally and vertically, making them feel bigger than they actually are, and at the end of each level, you face a boss. Now, these bosses are very easy. Their patterns are simple and easy to learn, memorize, and you're going to have very little trouble when it comes to the bosses themselves. However, the levels do get increasingly more challenging, and with the way enemies are placed in this game, you really need to be at the top of your own game to successfully clear them with as little health lost as possible. Panic Restaurant truly shines in the aesthetic department. We have beautiful, gorgeously designed characters, very expressive, very well animated sprites that honestly do justice to the character designs they're based on. The game's color palette is very gentle, very soft, almost pastel-like, which makes the whole game feel and look like something you'd see on an old restaurant menu even. So, as far as visuals go, Panic Restaurant truly is a marvel to behold. Except one problem. Actually, there are 2 problems I have. For one, I understand why it was done. I understand the platform's limitations. However, I'm not happy with the fact that Kokun and Cookie's shoes are the same color as their skin, so they appear barefoot. This, I'm sure, could have been addressed if we look at the Mega Man games. They used a trick there to make Mega Man's skin a different color from his suit, so I'm sure that could have been done in this game as well. And another thing is, in the Japanese version, I'm not happy with Kokun's head bash animation and his ducking crouching animations. They both look out of place for the character. However, these are small problems, and the overall look and feel of the game is outstanding regardless of whether you play the Japanese or American and European versions. Music and sound are great as well. Now, music isn't outstanding by any means. It could have been better in my opinion, but it does manage to create a fitting atmosphere for the setting and game itself. So guys, that's about it for Panic Restaurant. Now, should we talk about the elephant in the room or not? I think I'll just go ahead and talk about it because at this point, there's no sense hiding it. Unfortunately, this wonderful game has become a victim of the retro collecting fad, and It costs an insane amount of money in America, and sadly the European version of the game is rapidly increasing in price as well, despite not even being that rare in Europe. So I will say this, I own the game original. However, if I wasn't lucky enough to own the original game, I would have gladly bought a bootleg version of it from AliExpress, or I would have even bought a slightly more expensive reproduction cartridge. Because in my opinion, and this is something that many will disagree with, and mostly those who have something to gain from games being as expensive as they are, the worst thing you can do right now for the hobby is support resellers, scalpers, and hoarders in paying the prices they ask for. Unfortunately, retro game collecting has become a huge problem. It has become a way for certain people to, I guess, invest in their futures and make it so that all these old games are inaccessible to those who just want to play them. Because all my old games I have, even the rare stuff such as Little Samson and Mighty Final Fight, Panic Restaurant, and I don't know, all sorts of other SNES games like Pocky and Rocky 1 and 2, and again, all sorts of games I own, I play. Yeah, they might get damaged, but I play them because that's what games are for. I play them on actual hardware. They're not there to sit in a shelf or to sit in a drawer and never be played. I own these games, I bought these games to play them, to have fun with them. Unfortunately, many people nowadays will never be able to experience these games on actual hardware unless they want to resort to buying bootlegs or reproductions or flashcards. That's why I strongly encourage you to play this game, to play Panic Restaurant, and not support the resellers. Play it on an emulator. Emulation is pretty much 100% accurate by now for the NES. Play it on actual hardware if you can. Get a bootleg, get a flashcard, do whatever you want to do. But do not support this menace that resellers have become. I don't care if I get hate for this. This is how I feel. And I think that these old games deserve better. So there you have it. That's what I think. And yes, it is wrong to pass bootlegs up or reproduction cards, to pass them up as originals. This is just as bad, in my opinion, as scalpers trying to get insane amounts of money for these rare games. Both are equally as wrong and extorting from people. So guys, that's it for this review. I really do hope you play this game and have fun with it and love it as much as I do.